if the goal is just a simple goal of like, I just want to live life the right way.
Yeah.
And then God, in doing all this, he's bringing us out of the dark, taking us out of one situation and setting us apart into the light where everything is clear. That's where then that broken relationship becomes justified.
Welcome back to the Reology Podcast. Reology is a nonprofit ministry that is centered around rethinking, researching, and rediscovery, a process that dives deep into the depths of an intimate partnership with God through a concept Jesus initiated called ecclesia. We strive to cultivate an environment that is not only safe to question and seek, but also one that is founded on the truths of partnership, words of hope that were uttered from the lips of Jesus himself. So in this podcast, we'll question Christian tradition, we'll investigate God myths, and we'll listen to those who are stirring, questioning, and desperately seeking more of what God is doing in and around us each day.
Hey everybody, this is Scott Johnson with the Reology Podcast, and that guy over there is Brandon. Good morning, Brandon.
Hey everyone.
And this is God, Coffee, and Questions, where we talk about all the stuff that people start to kind of wonder about, and when they start questioning how they were raised in church or religion or Christianity, and we start kind of wondering about why we believe in certain things and believe the way we do and why we get taught certain things. We talk about those things while we drink coffee. And so this is today's episode. Today's episode is going to be Christian identity. Is that correct, Brandon?
That's it. I don't have any coffee with me today, but
well, I'm going to come clean. I'm going to come clean. We just said I was going to fib. I have an empty cup here because I just drank mine and I went to go get it and I thought, oh shoot, I actually drank it. But this is Robin's actually. This is a prop. Yeah, this is a prop. This is a plug for Starbucks. They did these state mugs. Do you remember these?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Robin started collecting the ones that all the states we've lived in.
Nice.
We currently live in South Carolina.
They're fun. Indiana?
They have all these little designs. No, when I was in Indiana a couple of years back, we went to like 5 different Starbucks looking for the Indiana cup.
Didn't have them. All right, I'll keep my eye out for them.
Yeah, do that. Yeah, we've got North Carolina. There's actually a Charlotte cup as well, and then we have Georgia and we have Kentucky. So she's got those, but
nice.
Missing Indiana.
All right,
keep an eye out.
I will.
Keep an eye out. Hey, also want to encourage you guys, if you're watching this on YouTube, to like it. We would love for you to subscribe. You don't want to miss a video that we do. We try to do these every week and put them out on every Tuesday. We also have a bunch of shorts that go along. They're just little clips of these episodes. But if you're listening on, a podcast somehow, some way, wherever you go to get your podcast, we'd love for you to follow along with us as well. And it just helps us out. And if you too, we want to say this every time we start these, if you two are like right there with us, this is something that's right up your alley. You want to reach out to us and ask a question or just say hi or whatever, you can do that through the website, which is reologylife.com. You can reach us there. So again, cool. Thanks. So Brandon, with this topic, like what came to your mind? What was like the main question that you kind of was like,
Yeah, the question is about one of those 10-cent words, sanctification. I had been studying some, well, first of all, kind of growing up in the church, it becomes a routine thing to hear, like when people are, either preaching or standing up and giving their testimony. It seems like it's pretty common to hear somebody say, well, I'm just a sinner that needs Jesus, right? Pretty common thing. And so that's kind of always how and it completely makes sense, right? We are living our day-to-day lives. We are inevitably sinning and we do need Jesus. But then more recently, I started digging into this concept of sanctification, what exactly that means, and came across a podcast episode. I think it was Johnny Chang, Christian podcaster, that was talking about this topic, and he had mentioned about how that is the wrong mindset to have, particularly when you start digging into the scriptures, where you see Paul and others. I think in Hebrews, there's a lot on this topic about, what Jesus accomplished on the cross was making us righteous or holy in God's eyes, sanctifying us. And that is now our identity. We still sin, but we are not sinners when it comes down to things. We are righteous in God's eyes. And so I'm trying to work through that and figure out what that means. So,
yeah, I mean, it is a really confusing deal, because, we do have these words, and as we've talked about for such a long time, we have these words right in front of us in our Bibles, and they're in English, and they are meant to be used to help translate older words in different languages. And so we still use English translations that were honestly as old as 500 years ago. And even then, I'm not going to say some, but probably the majority of those translations have been translated from the Latin, or what's called the Latin Vulgate. Some of them have not been. So that's why we go back to our dude, William Tyndale, right? William Tyndale actually he said, I'm not going to translate from the Latin Vulgate. I'm going to go back to the original, which is the Greek. And I want to go from there. But almost everybody else either copied what Tyndale did, or just basically took his and said, yeah, I like what he did here, and I'm going to use it in ours. Or they go from the Latin Vulgate and they translate from that. So there's already a concept in the Latin Vulgate that was translated from Greek, and it goes through, centuries of where Christianity has gone culturally. And unfortunately, Christianity culturally went through a real Hellenistic period. And for those of you who don't know what Hellenistic means, it just means that, Jesus pretty much grew up in a Hellenistic world where as we've said before, Brandon, Greco-Roman, right?
yeah,
Where the
Greek influence.
Romans, yeah, a Greek influence with the Roman control, basically is what that means. And the Romans were influenced by the Greek as well. So obviously they worship Greek gods, and they believe in the Greek philosophy was a major,
This is kind of like a
contributor.
westernization, right? I mean, this is
Absolutely.
the early stages of westernization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And so, so the concept really, and if you listen to like guys like N.T. Wright at all, they're real big on talking about, like Plato being a massive, massive influence into Christianity in the wrong way, because what a lot of this looks like, these words and this conversation, and primarily Romans is a lot of it, because Paul is really into it. He's geeked out because Paul was, number one, a rabbi and part of the Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
He was a Pharisee of Pharisees, maybe not part of the Sanhedrin, but definitely a Pharisee of Pharisees who was zealous for God. He understood all of the stuff leading up to Jesus, but just didn't recognize Jesus as the fulfillment of that, as the anointed
Yeah.
one, right? The chosen one. And so therefore, when Paul does meet Jesus and Paul is transformed, he then sees as what we've talked about, the narrative, and goes, holy crap, it's right there. Oh my gosh. So in Romans, he really tries to, this is his masterpiece, right? And this is his, magnum opus kind of a deal.
Yeah.
He's really kind of put it out. And so he uses a lot of, since you're an attorney, you get this, he uses a lot of courtroom talk and legalese and all that kind of stuff to help people understand. Problem is that after Paul is when everything really starts to go through that Hellenistic period of influence. And so it makes it look like as we've said before, that really what Jesus is doing here is Jesus is the Superman syndrome,
Yeah.
as we've said. Brandon is falling off of a building and he's screaming, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to die. Someone help me. Superman, help me. Jesus, help me." And Jesus comes flying out of nowhere and saves
Swoops
Brandon
in.
before
Yeah.
he, and whatever. So there's this idea that you make mistakes, that you sin against God, and your the penalty that you pay is to go to hell.
Yeah.
And if Superman comes in and swoops in and saves you from that, then he saves you from hell and you get to go to heaven.
Right.
And that's the Plato influence of how even their philosophy, not just philosophy in Christianity, but philosophy in religion
Yeah.
looked like. So not just necessarily looking at Jesus, but looking at just how religion it works. This is kind of how it works. We're all going to go to Hades. We're all going to go burn. We're all going to get destroyed. We're all, all this kind of stuff. And as we've said from the very beginning, is God has made it very, very clear that He is holy, or AKA unique. He's different, and He works differently. And so, yeah, it gets real confusing. And I would say, and see if you agree with me on this, but I would say that the vast majority of Christians still believe that way,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Even in just my own anecdotal experience. I mean, that's what I have been taught my entire life until recently. I've started to come off
Yeah,
of it, but it seems like that's just ubiquitous.
absolutely. Absolutely. And, and even, there's a video on where Tim Mackey, and I think you and I both have seen it, where he's like teaching at an old church he used to be at, and he's got that like a whiteboard behind him or whatever, and he says, most of you, this is what most people think Christians believe, and he does exactly what we just talked
Yeah.
about.
It's like a
And he said,
timeline, and then at the end it
right,
forks between heaven and hell. Yep.
and it forks between heaven and hell, and he steps back and he goes, some of you, most of you in this room are probably thinking, well, I actually do. That
Yeah.
is me. And he kind of, helps to reteach that. And so for me, I think our conversation probably should start more along the lines with the understanding what the words, because we've talked about it, but just going back and kind of going back to understanding of the word sin or sinner,
Yeah.
because I think that really helps repave the road a little bit to make everything else a little clearer. Most of what I am looking at here is Romans 5.
Yep.
And Romans 5, let me also say this too about sanctification. So sanctification really is just it is a real word. Unfortunately, it's probably only used in religious context now
Yeah.
because no one else in the world knows or gives a crud about what that is.
And probably more so in more orthodox traditions, I would say, because in the
Probably.
Protestant church, you don't hear it all that often, but in the Catholic church, you do.
You do, yeah. And so the idea of sanctification is really very similar to anointing, right? We've talked about that on the podcast before, of just being able to really separate something, like to bring something out of something else and set it aside for a specific type of purpose. And so therefore, because most people think, well, sanctification is a way to get clean,
Yeah.
right? Again, there's that Hellenistic viewpoint. I'm dirty, I've sinned, I'm ugly, and God is going to sweep in and clean me up. And it's really less to do about like cleaning or purifying and more about the same idea of anointing. So if you think of it that way, that God is trying to set us apart for something,
Yeah.
that is true. That is absolutely true. So in Romans 5, really, I look at this because Paul's really kind of going through what we're going to talk about. We won't go through it verse for verse or anything like that, but Paul is, we're going to get back to it, but Paul is really kind of setting the stage, and he's going to use some of these words that we really get like super bogged down with because we don't know, what they mean. And we just guess that they fit right along with the whole Hellenistic deal of, I do bad things and all those
Yeah.
bad things add up and all those, and so therefore the wages of sin is is death, right? It's right there. Wages of
Hmm.
sin is death. But a little different. So we talked about sin before, and hamartia is the Greek word for sin. And as we've said before, it really means less about doing wrong, bad things. Like I'm doing bad, and more along the lines of like of missing the mark. And we've equated it to, and a bunch of people have equated it to the idea of an archer shooting an arrow, and
Yeah.
he's aiming for a target, and he misses the target. Is really what the idea is. And so it's less of like the concept of like I'm just I'm not even trying anymore. I'm just going to go and do live my own life. It's the concept and idea that like you think one way is the right way. You're aiming at that, but you're
Hmm.
really missing the boat.
Hmm.
You're missing the boat on it. It would be like the idea of thinking that, well, the way to get a bunch of money in this world is to, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to fall for these, pyramid schemes, right? That's the way to get financially freedom. You have a goal,
Yeah.
but you're completely missing the
Yeah.
point. And that if we can have that framework, like that really like helps everything else become very clear. Like I do have a goal. My goal is to live life well. The problem is I'm just missing the mark here because it's not really the way to live life well.
Yeah.
It's almost like that idea of someone, back in the day, like Audio Adrenaline, I believe it was the Christian rock band. They talked about God-shaped hole. Do you remember
Hmm.
that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's like one of those Christian,
Hmm.
little symbolic teaching things or what illustrations, which is cool. But and it probably is. I would probably think that it's more like a purpose-shaped hole, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to find my purpose in life, and maybe my purpose is just to go and make a bunch of money, make myself happy. Maybe my purpose in life is to, get a good career and clean people's teeth for a living. Maybe
Yeah.
my purpose in life is to just raise kids or what, so like there is a goal and you are aiming at something. It's not like you're just mindlessly sinning, mindlessly making mistakes or even purposely making mistakes. You're purposely trying to live life in a certain way. You're just not quite hitting, the mark. You're not quite in the right lane. So if we think of sin and a sinner in
Yeah.
that way, you understand that that's the bigger picture. Now, I'm not saying that hamartia does not also mean that you've
Yeah.
made a mistake. It does. It does. But on the bigger picture for what God and Jesus are talking about and what Paul's talking about right here in Romans 5 is like, this is the deal. We all think that life is this, and
Hmm.
actually there is a way to live life well, and
Yeah.
it's God's way. Any other way, you're kind of missing the boat, and that's what that means. So then Paul starts talking about just the words justify and righteous. We're going to get to
Yep.
righteous. So justification. There's another Christian,
Yep.
Christianese word right there with
Justification,
sanctification.
sanctification, glorification.
All the Asians.
Yeah.
I just came back from vacation, and I wish I was
I don't
still
think
on
that's in
vacation, but that's not in there. So let's talk about the word justify, because the Greek word for justify is dikaio, and really all that means is to make right, to make something right. And so if Paul has really kind of gone into the whole like courtroom kind of deal, you've got someone who's in the courtroom who is guilty, right? They have not
Yeah.
been living life right. They've made a mistake, whatever. And so in order to make things right, something has to happen, right? You either
Yeah.
have to pay a penalty of some sort
Serve
or,
jail time.
yep, serve jail time, pay a fine, pay a fee, or you can have your case dismissed. The judge has the power to dismiss your case. There's these videos. I don't remember this judge's name on YouTube. I'm sure you've probably seen this guy. I don't even remember where he is, but he's like one of the most famous like small claims court
Yeah.
judges,
Like
and he
Judge
deals
Judy.
mainly with yeah, he mainly deals with like traffic violations and stuff like that. That's
Okay.
kind of, it's
Oh,
not
I know who
like,
you're talking about.
it's not
Yeah.
trial court kind of
Yeah.
stuff,
He's
right?
like an
It's
older
just like
guy.
yeah, he's an older guy.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
know who you're talking about.
Yeah. And so there's so many times where like someone is they are guilty,
Yeah.
right? They are absolutely guilty. They went through two red lights and they ran off the road and hit a tree, right? And they go before the judge and they plead their case. I was wrong, whatever. And so they are either going to do jail time, like you said, or pay a penalty,
Yeah.
probably at that point, get their license revoked,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, right? And that's it. They are helpless,
Yeah.
except for they are at the mercy,
Yeah.
as they call it, the mercy of the court, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're at the mercy of the court. I can't get out of it. I'm either going to pay in one way or other, or maybe somehow the judge might have mercy on me and he can make things right. And so that's what Paul is talking about here. Paul is basically referencing the idea in a courtroom setting that you are the sinner. You were trying to do the right thing, but you didn't quite make it right. You're not quite on the right path. And primarily for Paul, he's really, kind of going backwards in time and referencing the Hebrew people, right?
Yeah.
In the Old Testament, the First Testament, and how that's where the separation of the
Yeah.
relationship happened.
Yeah. Especially the Pharisees and Sadducees, they had this idea of what made them right by God. And he's
Right.
saying we were missing the mark in that regard.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, like the ultimate missing the mark is like, I want to live life the right way, but the only way to truly live life the right way is by design,
Yeah.
is the blueprint of what our purpose was intended. If we were actually created and we were created to be in partnership with God, then that's the blueprint. And anything other than that is just veering off, is missing the mark. And so ultimately, hamartia references that. And so for the Jews, they understand that they had not only does humanity have that separation with God, but the Jews then, when they went into captivity, I mean, there was nothing from God, for 400 years, there's nothing. They heard nothing from God. It's gone. It's gone.
Yeah.
And so they are trying to now cling to the old ways and go back to, as we referenced a couple episodes ago, or last episode actually, the Torah, right?
Yeah.
And the rules and the laws, and we're going to try to hang on to this relationship. That is basically an illustration of someone who's standing in the courtroom, clutching their legal documents,
Yeah.
going, I'm going to hang on to this, and I don't know what's going to happen because I haven't really heard from the judge yet.
Yeah.
And so Jesus then is the way God chooses, is the avenue that God chooses to justify all of us who are not quite there with the ultimate and original purpose of our design, of living life the right way, the way that it was intended. Maybe the right way is maybe not the right way to say that, right way.
Yeah.
Right? But
Because we're not able to do it on our own. It seems to be the point.
Yeah. Because the idea is like, I don't want I don't want it to sound like legalistic, right? It's like, there's one way, there's only one way.
Yeah.
But the reality is like, so instead of like using the word right way or the phrase right way, maybe the best way to say it is like the original design, right?
Yeah.
If you believe that we were created, right, then there was a creator, and he doesn't just create things just because this will be fun, do that. No, he has a purpose in that, and the purpose is the ecclesia, or the partnership between us. Now, if you don't believe in creation and you just believe we just kind of somehow evolved from something like that, then there really is no purpose.
Right.
There's no purpose. There's no original design. There's none of that. But in this framework, if we were created and we were created with a purpose, then that is the right way, or the original purpose. And so in order to get back to the original purpose, the only way to really truly make things right, to bring us back in alignment with partnership, God chose to use Jesus to justify the situation, because there was a penalty to pay, and we're standing there clutching the legal documents, and we're like, oh great, now what? I got to go to serve time. I'm going to get penalized. Is my license going to be revoked? What's going to happen? And so what happens is that the judge, the creator, the only one who can actually, dismiss the case,
Yeah.
is the judge. And the judge justifies the situation. He brings things to alignment. He makes things right. And so therefore, then we become the dikaios, righteous.
The righteous. Yeah.
That to justify means to make it right, and now we are right. And so whenever someone says, the word righteous or righteousness, now I'm now righteous, we tend to have that mentality again, that like we're clean and pure and holy and sparkling and
that's the rub. You don't want to view yourself that way, because that's not how you are, even though Jesus has already accomplished that, because you are still broken. You still miss the mark. And I think that's
absolutely
the disconnect.
And that is the disconnect, because once people think, well, I've been justified and now I'm righteous, I'm clean, I'm whiter than snow, right? There's part of that is true. And it's the idea of my sins have been washed away. But if we look at it in the idea of hamartia, instead of just like the general idea that I make mistakes and they're piling up and now God comes and washes them away, the reality is that like my relationship with God, our relationship with God has been broken.
Yeah.
Right. And so now I am trying to live life the right way without really being aligned in the only way that can happen.
Yeah.
And so therefore it's broken. It's hamartia. It is a sin situation. It's flawed, or it's failure. It's failure. And it's not failure that like I did this and I did this. Now I got to go confess and now I'll be fine again. No, it's an actual like moral, failure throughout all humanity. And so it's not just a personal thing either, where it's like, I understand that Jesus it's a great cliche to think that Jesus had you on his mind while he's hanging on the cross, had me on his mind.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he had every individual human being ever born and ever to be born on his mind, but this was the Father's idea, and the Son says, I will obey you, and that's what we're going to do. It's for all humanity.
Yeah, and
so broken.
That brings up Hebrews, because I was looking at this before we got on here. So Hebrews 10:14, it says, "For by a single offering he has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified."
Yes, all those who are being sanctified. So if we look at that as the idea of being called out or set apart, it's not really. Again, it's the idea of taking something out of a situation and putting it in, as we could say, like maybe in the right light, right? Taking it out of darkness and clearing the view to go, again, if the goal is just a simple goal of like, I just want to live life the right way. And then God, in doing all this, he's bringing us out of the dark, taking us out of one situation and setting us apart into the light where everything is clear. That's where then that broken relationship becomes justified, and he brings it back together. He heals it back together. That's why we talk about the reconciliation and the word salvation meaning more about healing than it is about swooping in to rescue someone from the depths of hell.
Yeah. So I think, if I'm understanding, and I'm starting to, I think, but because I'd always viewed it as, well, I can't say I'm righteous because I continue to sin. But if we view it as Jesus making us righteous, meaning that we are now in right standing with God by virtue of our connection with Jesus. Jesus was the one that made put us in the right standing, despite what we are inevitably going to continue to do, which is continue to make mistakes, continue to sin. It's just that we are not going to be judged by those mistakes we are inevitably going to continue to make. We have already
Yes.
been put in right standing with God. But that runs us another risk, though, right? If you start to follow that too deeply, I could see somebody starting to say that's an excuse to continue sinning after the fact. I'm righteous,
Oh, yeah.
so I can just do whatever I want after the fact. I don't think the Bible teaches that for sure.
No, and again, like that mentality is the once saved, always saved
Yeah,
mentality, and it does bring in that Hellenistic, influence, right?
yeah,
Of the idea of saving. What Jesus is doing is he's basically healing a relationship. And it's almost like you and I like getting mad and we don't talk for 20 years. And it's not exactly like this, but it's something like this.
yeah,
And like you come back and say, "Hey man, hope you're doing well. I hate what happened. I really hate what happened, and I would love for us to get back together. I would love for us to get back to where we were." Like that step is what God's doing.
yeah,
Because it's not about, when I talk about reconciliation, and even Paul down in Romans 5 down, he talks about we were once enemies with God,
yeah,
and now we're friends with God. And it's not that like God says, "Hey, guess what? You won't be my enemy anymore. We're going to be buddies."
yeah,
Well, you and I both know it takes two to tango. And so again, if our focus is less on my soul is going to burn in hell, and
yeah,
now my soul has been saved or washed clean or whatever, it's so much less about that and more
yeah,
about an actual the nature of creation. The nature of creation is partnership, is
yeah.
relationship.
And it also gets you to a point where, because if you're stuck in the mindset that I am just a sinner and that's your identity, I can see you falling into the trap of saying, well, I'm never going to be good enough. And you get into this mindset of always doing something wrong and having to then seek, repent for that particular sin. And then it's just a cycle, a vicious cycle day after day. Whereas if you think your identity, if you believe that your identity is that you are righteous, you're still going to miss the mark, but it's less about the cycle then of sinning, repenting. It's you think back to, okay, Jesus took care of this on the cross. I need to kind of go back to scripture and rework how I'm living out my salvation. So,
Yes, totally, totally. We've said this a lot on the podcast, because this is like one of the things I try to tell people all the time is like, if we will look at this more like a marriage
yeah,
than a God and his creation, which is it's just so Hellenistic, right? The gods are pissed. They're
yeah,
mad. They're angry. They are ready to destroy. And because I've done so many wrong things, and now
yeah,
I've got to go and do some right things to level it out,
yeah,
right? So that he won't come and destroy. And God from the very beginning has said, "Holy, holy, 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 holy." Even the creatures surrounding him,
yeah,
"Holy, holy, holy." Different, different,
yeah,
different, 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 unique, unique. And so if we look at this whole thing as a relationship, it's literally like a marriage, right? If a marriage gets broken and it's on the rocks
yeah,
and it doesn't look good, this is going to end in divorce. But yet, all it takes is one of the partners to go, "You know what? I think this can be saved, and I want to work on it,
yeah,
and I love you, and it's worth it." And and it's that act of stepping out. God have so like Romans 5:9, Paul says, this is later down in there.
yeah,
Paul says, "Since we have now been justified by his blood," right? So because Jesus did what he did,
Yeah.
right? And he died. That justified, then made things right. Made
Yeah.
things right. Our relationship is now aligned.
Yeah.
How much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? And people look at that as like, see,
Yep.
there's the Hellenistic thing, God's
Right.
wrath. And the actual reality of this phrase is definitely points to a situation of major disappointment.
Yeah.
God has a relationship. You have a marriage, and all of a sudden, you know, you know, I'm married to my wife, Robin. All of a sudden, I have an inappropriate relationship with somebody else. I
Mhm.
have now broken the trust.
Yeah.
And Robin is like, has every right to have wrath towards me. She has every right to be angry. She has every right to be disappointed. I have broken the trust. And now she has every right to shut this relationship down. But instead, she says, no, she's the judge in this case. I can make things right. Because
Yeah.
really what should happen, Scott, is that you should pay for your stupidity. You should
Yeah.
pay for it. But I'm going to be the bigger person. I'm going to step forward and say, we can do this. That moment of doing that does this. It
Yep.
levels it out. It doesn't mean that it's perfect. It doesn't mean that you can ever break it up again. It doesn't mean that. It just means there's a way now. There is now a direct,
Yeah.
there's a way that we can come back together. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that, like, because when we say phrases like, well, we couldn't do it on our own, the reality of what that phrase means, if you think about the marriage illustration
Yeah.
we just talked about, it's like, if Brandon, if you and your wife, if you did something against her and now she doesn't return, you can't go to her
Yeah.
and do all the right things to force her to come back into this
Yeah.
marriage,
Yeah. 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 And
right?
grafting that onto when folks at church say I'm a sinner and I needed Jesus to help me do that. What you're not saying is Jesus is stepping in and helping me avoid sin at every instance. What you're saying is Jesus stepped in once and essentially covered all of my past sin, my present sin, and my future sin by his one sacrifice.
Well, and again, it's all dependent on what people are defining as sin.
Yeah.
Because if they're looking at it as like all the bad things I've done,
Yeah.
that's really, honestly, it's a real watering down of what actually
Right.
happened. It's really just going like, it's almost like, it's a me syndrome. That makes it more about me,
Yeah.
because now I feel better about all the dumb things I did because
Right.
Jesus came and covered
Right.
all those things. And that's not really about it, because that's an opposite way to look at this. Like,
Yeah.
the problem is that humanity cheated on
Yeah.
God
Yeah.
in the marriage.
Yes.
And God had every right to be mad. He had every right to have wrath. He had every right to do whatever he wanted to do. He had every right to just say, you know what, I'm done. I'm done with humans. They're selfish. You can't trust them as far as you can throw them. Forget it. He didn't do that. So when someone, I think a lot of people do come to God for the wrong reasons. They do come to God because I'm a sinner. I've done so many bad things about you, and I feel really bad about my past. It's almost like I want to clear my
Yeah.
conscience by
Right.
becoming a Christian.
Yeah.
And it's like, God's like going,
Yeah.
so the whole repentance part is less to do about, well, I did this bad thing and I did that bad thing, and I repent. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for
Yeah.
that. The repentance part is really going back to the narrative of the story of, I cheated on
Yeah.
my husband.
Yeah.
I cheated. And that's when you don't just go, well, I'm sorry that I did this one thing, and I'm sorry I did. You're sorry because the relationship fell apart,
Right.
and that humanity was at fault. And we can't go and somehow make it right and, manipulate God into doing something.
Yeah.
That's why the whole phrasing too of people saying like, well, you know, God offered this as a free gift. There's nothing, we didn't earn it.
Right.
The concept there is less to do with like, which is that idea of like me trying to, Brandon, come on, let's be buddies again. We can do it. Come on, man. It's like me trying to manipulate you to be friends again. Like that's
Yeah.
that mentality of like, I couldn't earn it.
Hmm.
I couldn't manipulate you to
Yeah.
do, to come back into this relationship. You had to decide on your own that this is what you're going to do. So God decided on his own that this is what I'm going to do
Yeah.
without even coming to the table, say, hey guys, here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to make things right. If I make things right, will you guys, is that okay? Can we agree to that?
Yeah.
He didn't even consult us. He just is like, you know what? This is not who I am. I'm a God of love, and I do love these people, and I am going to make it right. And now there's an opportunity. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that we're right. It doesn't mean that, well, it doesn't mean that we're in relationship.
Yeah.
It just means that the relationship connection has been restored.
It is.
So like if there's a road to a relationship with God, it was broken and you couldn't get to it.
Yeah.
Now it's been repaved.
Yeah.
And
The other strange thing, though, is that it was completely different for centuries before Jesus. It seemed like at that point in the Old Testament in particular, we've talked about this, but the law was essentially the way that God had laid out as it seemed like ostensibly that it was the way to be in right relationship with God was to follow the law. But then we learned through Jesus that the law essentially existed to expose that we were incapable of doing that on our own. So,
exactly. Yeah. All that is WebMD.
yeah.
It's WebMD going like, oh, well, you know, you have a tumor, or, oh, you've got the flu. It's not the solution.
Yeah.
It's exactly that. Exactly that. It exposes that there is brokenness going on here.
Yeah.
There is a broken relationship. It absolutely exposes that. And it doesn't, for all that time, God's solution is just like, I'm here. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's have this relationship. He was always seeking partnership again.
Yeah.
Let's just keep doing this partnership thing.
Yeah.
And, humanity kept cheating on God.
Yeah.
And so, it's like multiple moments of cheating, right?
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. It's not like I just cheated one time. Like
Right.
you are a cheater.
Yeah.
You cheat.
But even still, he would latch on to the good that they did do, and he would bless them when they did right by him by
Right.
following the law.
Yeah, absolutely. Because he's love. He's all love. He's not angry. It doesn't mean that he can't get disappointed or he can't get frustrated. Absolutely. But in the end, what guides God is not frustration
Right.
or anger or disappointment. What guides God is just love, pure love. And so, yes. So in the end, all this is a relationship. It was broken. We missed the mark. It's just out of alignment. And then God decides to bring it all back into alignment and just wipe the slate clean and say, here's the deal. This is what we're doing. Now there's a direct path to me, God with us, Jesus, and I'm going to make it all right. And now we have the lines of communication are back open. And now when God does that, then the ball is now put in our court.
Yeah.
And it does not mean, like you said, it does not mean that we don't make mistakes. Of course we make mistakes. We make mistakes in our relationships with our wives and our spouses and friends and whatnot. But it doesn't, but it doesn't
change our identity.
Well, it doesn't break the relation. Some of those things aren't deal breakers, right?
Right.
But if you multiply those things, if that then becomes, because again, if your focus is I want to live life right. Well, here's the deal. God is saying the way to live life right is in partnership with me.
Yeah.
But if you stop being a partner and you start looking at like, oh, I got it from here, God, thank you.
Yeah.
And you've helped me to this level. I've got it on my own. That is where the relationship then starts to break apart again. And it doesn't mean the relationship for all humanity is broken apart.
Right.
It just means yours is broken apart. That's why some people go, well, once saved, always saved. You can't get away from it because God gave it to you. You can't, how can I ever fall apart? Well, what they're getting confused with is the overarching relationship with humanity.
Yeah.
They're thinking that means then it's the personal.
Yeah. The creation of the path. They're mistaking the creation of the path for the individual.
You got it.
Response to it.
You got it. And so, so that's where that kind of breaks down. But the reality is like Jesus is now the way, right? And so since he is the way, it means that there is restoration. Yeah. And there's also restoration that happens, once we get back into that partnership with him and we walk on that daily relationship with him every day, every hour. There's continuing restoration. And the only way that it's actually complete is when, we're together again, when heaven and earth come together again, new heaven, new earth. The whole idea of the garden, God is actually walking with humanity and they are in right relationship, like totally together.
That's the glorification.
That is it.
As the Catholics would say.
That's, well, I mean, yes, the idea of like God being completely glorified is for the ecclesia to be whole again. Yeah. And functional and being what it was designed to be.
From the whole Rheology team, we hope these podcasts are encouraging and educational. Rheology exists for three main reasons: to reach, train, and equip those who want to go deeper with God in this partnership called ecclesia. If God has been stirring in your heart, where you are wondering if there's more than what you've been experiencing in today's 21st century Christianity, we'd love to connect with you, to hear your story and help you know that you are not alone. You can simply contact us via the website, rheologylife.com, or reach out via Instagram at rheology_life. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.